My guest today is Geoff Curtis, author of the new book, Embracing Your Own Purgatory. Geoff spent nearly 3 decades building a highly successful career in communication, culminating in senior leadership roles, including Chief Communication Officer for a major healthcare organization. Like many high achievers, Geoff's professional identity became deeply intertwined with his sense of self. But when the company he worked for was acquired and his role was eliminated, he found himself confronting a question that many professionals fear. Who am I when the title is gone? Rather than writing another book about reinvention from the other side of the journey, Geoff offers something much more honest and straightforward. He writes from what he calls professional identity purgatory, that uncomfortable space between who you were and who you're becoming. Through personal stories and hard earned insights, he explores career loss, purpose, grief, uncertainty, and the challenge of rebuilding identity after disruption. Today, we'll discuss why career transitions can feel so emotionally overwhelming, why high achievers often struggle the most, and how we can find meaning and direction when life forces us into an unexpected new chapter. Geoff, welcome to People in Transition.
Thanks for having me.
Geoff, let's jump right in here. After nearly 30 years of professional success, what surprised you most about how quickly your sense of identity unraveled when your role ended?
What was interesting is what surprised me wasn't necessarily losing the job. It was discovering the job had been really the scaffolding for my entire identity. And by that, I mean not just my work identity, but my identity outside of work. And so take that scaffolding away, and I didn't really feel that there was an independent Geoff underneath. And I think something we all assume is that when your identity is so enmeshed in, or your career is so enmeshed with your identity, you assume that the achievement makes you just resilient. And again, when that scaffolding was removed, it made me really exposed and asking myself a lot of the questions, which is the purpose really for writing the book.
And you talk about in that book, you introduce the concept of professional identity purgatory. Can you describe to our listeners what did you mean by that? And how did you realize you were living in that identity purgatory?
I'll start with the latter part of the question about the realization. And in one point in the book, for just a little historical context, after I exited my corporate role, I started a fellowship at the University of Chicago, and that was meant to be kind of my fresh start, because the whole concept of that was, how do you use your experience to really impact society in a different way? And it was a couple of days in, and the moderator for one of our intro sessions asked if anybody felt like they were in the wrong meeting. And I'm sure many of your listeners have been there before, but my hand shot up instantly because I thought I was so out of place. And I guess that's when I first started realizing that I had packed my entire being into this 30-year identity as a communicator. Stepping outside of that, I didn't know who I was in different contexts, which was really strange for me, because all of a sudden I wasn't an expert in the room that I was in the cohort that I was in. And that was a real shock to the system. One point I want to make for your listeners is that the purgatory piece of it, the professional identity purgatory, I want your listeners to understand that it isn't failure. It's just transition without a timeline. And I think that's difficult for high achievers in particular, because there's that gap that exists without structure and without clear direction that I think is scary for a lot of people, but it's not failure. And I think part of it is just understanding how to, for lack of a better term, or to use the term in the title, embrace what that scariness looks like. And I used purgatory specifically instead of reinvention or transition, because I wanted to really feel that it was okay to be unfinished and okay to be waiting to understand what was next and really work on what was next.
Yeah, I'm sure you thought long and hard in terms of that purgatory. And what the message was that you were trying to convey in that title.
Well, and particularly since I'm not a religious person, Bob, people have asked me a lot of religious questions. Oh, you must have had a Catholic upbringing or something, and I didn't. I know it meant something for me just because I know it's a transformative spot. If you look at the religious literature, it's an uncomfortable spot, and I just wanted people to really grasp onto that feeling.
Geoff, I get feedback from some of my clients that the career transition oftentimes feels far more emotionally disruptive than what people expect. So I guess a two-part question. Number one is that do you think that is the case? And then the second part is why do you think that's the case?
Well, a couple things. I think we expect to grieve a job or a job loss, but what we're really grieving, and we may not realize it, is that identity. And I think there's no clean event with the identity piece of it to mourn or recover from. So I think that's why it's really difficult for high performers. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners are high performers, high achievers. I think we always think we can work harder, outwork the problem. And with no defined outcome, that's one thing that really is kind of outside of our function. We can't outwork the problem of an identity loss. And I think that's really at the core of the issue. It becomes a real roller coaster, at least it did for me, Bob, because even when I tried to move on and do different things, I was so tied back to that identity that every result that didn't go as planned, or I viewed that as failure. I again the lows and the what I perceived as failure were really devastating. So I think there's a little bit of a juxtaposition of people grieving a job loss when they should really be looking more toward grieving the identity.
How did this play out for you? Were you despondent, angry, drank more? What were some of the behaviors that people might be on the lookout for so that they can implement some corrective action?
Well, I went back to what I knew, and that was try to use any type of work, any type of activity to suppress emotion. And I don't know if people know that they're doing that, so that may be the hardest thing to look out for. But I did become a little bit removed. I had significant depression toward the end of 2024 after I completed the fellowship, after I tried to consult for a little bit. I just wasn't happy. And I don't know if the lack of happiness or the inability to find joy in what I was doing was driving that, or if it was really not coming to terms with the identity piece of it and really how much that meant to me. So it's not that I went too far in substance abuse or anything like that. It was just depression. And I tried to remove myself the best I could from what I was feeling. And that was it's just been a common pattern my entire life. I did a lot of emotional suppression along the way, and it impacted a lot of relationships along the way too, but it was the only way that I knew how to deal with it. So I tried to find any type of productivity I could to avoid what I was feeling.
Geoff, one of your key themes is that success can actually make transition even harder. So, I guess my question around that is that how can decades of achievement become a liability during these times of change?
Well, I think if one thing, at least that's taught me, is that achievement taught me that you can, as I mentioned before, outwork or out strategize any problem. I think it's just you're such a driver that you think you can solve anything. And any type of imposed transition or loss or anything that's kind of out of your control, you can't outwork that. And the thing that you've always relied on is kind of removed in that situation. And the more you've achieved, the more your self-worth is bound up in titles and that momentum. To me, there's a lot further to fall and more to defend, because if you think about it, you're defending something from the past. And that's a hard situation to get into. I mean, it was that instinct and that achievement had served me in a way for decades. And I talked about emotional suppression, but it's like fill the void, keep filling the void, stay busy, project confidence. And I think that is actually some of the work that needs to be done to confront that, because it's the instinct that really sends you farther away from who you are. And the achievement that you've had over time is really driving that. So again, it's kind of a juxtaposition where you think achievement means all glory and everything's shiny, but I think the more you're into it, the more you realize how far removed you may be from who you really are.
Did you get this insight through self-reflection, using coaches, using therapists? What did you do to kind of come to this realization?
It was a lot of therapy, some coaching, some combo, some therapy while I was writing at the same time. Again, I think a big part of this, Bob, is just the work that needs to be done for people is the reflection piece of it. And I knew that I needed to take some of these steps in writing the book. And even if I didn't publish the book, it was still helpful for me and therapeutic for me to really look back at the patterns that I'd had throughout my entire career in life. Therapy helped me ask the right questions that helped me uncover a lot of those things. And so it was an important piece, but I think I needed to sit down and actually write in order to give the appropriate reflection to my entire career in life that I needed.
One of the things when I went through a downsizing and was impacted myself was that people, friends, people that I ran into, I think well-meaning, but they always use the, come on, Bob, you're a great performer, suck it up, keep looking, bounce back. And they all wanted me to move on past that emotional element that I was going through. And I just couldn't do that.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, experiences yourself with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a lot of it's the external environment, to be honest with you, Bob. I think the culture we're in and the work culture we're in celebrates comebacks more than they do the actual work that needs to be done or the work that you did to get to that comeback. And we don't appreciate the time that is needed to actually get to that comeback point. And again, I see it all the time on places like LinkedIn or other social media outlets where people are talking about how they've made some sort of triumphant pivot or there's redemption arc. But I think all of that speed gets mistaken for strength. And one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book from where I wrote it from in Purgatory was to have people be okay with being unfinished and not have bounced back yet, and show the work that gets you to the point where then you're ready to say, I bounce back or I'm pivoting to something else. And I do think that midlife amplifies it. You have time, space, and there's just, I think we often feel that we're pressured to rush to figure it out. And so I've experienced that a lot. I mean, and I'll just tell a quick story is people are asking me, okay, why not go just get another job? Similar to what you just said. People expecting me to bounce back. I had a good career. I've done this, I've done that. Go get another job. I think I would be doing myself a disservice if I did that, because then I'd be repeating patterns that I've repeated for the last 30 years. And I knew since I had the time, I needed to do more work on myself to get to a point where if I do bounce back or if I do decide to do something else, I'm better mentally prepared to do that. And so it's not about how quick, it's if I'm ready to do it.
And I know for me, looking at all the success stories on LinkedIn, though I wasn't trying to be negative about those people that were describing their success stories, but it was more difficult on me because would tell myself, I wonder what they have that I don't have.
Right.
They are moving on and I'm not. Any coaching regarding that?
I think it's just being comfortable with yourself and the situation you're in. I always like to tell people, and I'm completely guilty of this, and I'm still guilty of it. I feel like I'm running a race against someone who doesn't know it's a race. I'm putting all that pressure on myself. And so that means I'm not comfortable with myself in the situation that I'm in. And I think a lot of the external pressure drives that. And again, it's a scary space to be in, Bob. And I'm not saying it's the most comfortable for me, but over the last several years, I've had to get comfortable with the place that I'm in and the work that needs to be done and the timeline that I'm going to put myself on. And so I don't have a magic 5 step plan, but what I do have is to say, how can you get to a point or get to a point that you're comfortable with your own timeline, with the space that you're in, and that you feel that you've done enough work to be ready to move on from that space and do the next thing. I know it's a little abstract, but it's hard to fight against this external pressure and be comfortable with yourself at the same time. But that's really the way that it has to be done.
Geoff, you mentioned earlier the danger of filling the void
Yeah.
too quickly. Can you talk just a bit more as to why rushing into that next role or that business or that opportunity will actually slow your personal growth down?
It slows your personal growth because you're basically replicating things that you've done in the past. And again, as I said before, I think filling those voids, particularly with things that are unproductive that you think are productive, really sends you further from who you are and the work that needs to be done. The voids are really kind of the spaces that we need the most. And if you just continue filling, you're kind of skipping the question of who am I when I'm not doing the thing that I was just doing. And I think that's where you kind of need to get to. Not what do I do now or what do I do next? It's really who you are when you're not doing what you're doing. And I think I've learned anyway that that space and not filling it and just being in kind of an uncomfortable place and really trying to figure out that next path has really been helpful to me because it's given me time to reflect. And again, guilty as charged on filling those voids early on after I exited because I would fill my calendar with networking, coffees, advising early career people, all of those things. But it was just avoidance. It was avoidance. It was avoidance with really the work that I needed to do mentally on myself.
And Geoff, you're not advocating that everyone that loses their job has to go out and do something different. They may end up after the reflection go and be the same kind of role that they
Absolutely.
had before.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's not a complete pivot. And that's, you're right. I'm not suggesting a complete pivot to something different. I'm just saying take the time to reflect and understand what happened with the last thing that you were doing. And can you do enough work to make that next thing a little bit better? Or can you be better prepared? I'll use myself as an example. Back to the question I said about people asking me why not just get another job. I may do that. And frankly, it may be the same thing that I was doing before. But I can tell you one thing, I'm going to be better prepared mentally for whatever that next thing is and feel that I know my patterns. I know how to avoid certain things, all of those things. And the other thing I'm not prescribing either, Bob, is putting a months to year long time frame on it. That's not viable for everyone. It's even just can you be reflective for 3 days until you start searching for the thing that's next? I got in a very bad habit for my entire career where I'd leave a job on Friday and go back to work on Monday without any reflection on anything and would be repeating the same patterns. I just think it's important to do that level of reflection and introspection for people.
Geoff, let's talk just a bit in terms of the need to find meaning in the uncertainty that purgatory thrusts us into. You've said that purpose isn't a lightning bolt, which I love that analogy that you're using. Purpose isn't a lightning bolt. What does that mean, and how should people think differently about finding purpose during their own transition?
Yeah, so it's for two things. I think it's stop waiting for a single revelation. That's what I meant kind of by purposes and a lightning bolt. I think we have to get into habits of accepting that not every task has to deliver purpose. And there, the searching for that purpose and discomfort, again, isn't any type of failure. It's an evolution, particularly after a major transition. The second thing is that I think we have always have to let our identity be a little bit more provisional and trying new versions of ourselves rather than defending the old one. And so I think it's again it's really back to that revelation thing that's just really determining what gives you purpose on a daily basis. For me, it's starting to take shape after 2 years in a nonprofit that my wife and I are launching. And I didn't know if we were going to get to the place that we are now, but I had to try different things along the way to see if it was really for me meeting that purpose threshold. It wasn't something that was a shiny object that said, oh, I'm going to go do that. The requirement was frankly what I've talked about already was staying kind of in that space long enough to find exactly what was right, what was the right fit. Could we move forward doing something? And I'm hopeful that this is going to be the thing that adds more purpose to my life and purpose that I've been missing, frankly.
So that lends itself to helping someone begin to rebuild a sense of self when they no longer recognize themselves through the lens of their work, that they first have to understand what that purpose is and then create an
Yeah.
action plan based on that. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, I think so. And I think part of it is separating kind of based on past identity, what survives and what needs to go away. I think always your judgment, relationships you have, context, capabilities, all of those things were never really about your title or your old identity. They just need a different type of vehicle or they need different momentum. And so how do you take those things and start to use those in your rebuilding process, whatever that maybe look like, but not against or in the context of your old title. And I think one thing that always has to go, and I talk about this a lot, is that fusion between the achievement metrics that you used to have that measured that you used as a measure for your own worth. And I think building that new measure is often the hardest part. And that's what something I'm struggling with right now. I'm basing all of the success with the book, Bob, the success with the nonprofit. I'm basing that success on an old definition, old metrics, something that I tied a lot of my value to that I have to kind of get out of. And that's hard part of rebuilding, but I had to start with taking inventory of kind of what had to stay and what had to go away. The metric piece of it has to go away. It's just I haven't been able to dismiss it yet.
And for a kind of a type A personality that you and I are, and many of our listeners, people that want to get things done, take charge, create action, sitting with that uncertainty instead of treating it as a problem that must be solved immediately is really difficult.
Yes, it is. It is. And I think again, are you the type of person that can realize that the discomfort that you're feeling is trying to tell you something, or is the true time of reflection? It was very difficult for me. As I said, the I was trying to be busy, 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 and was trying to drown out kind of what the space was trying to tell me. The hardest shift that I've had to make, Bob, is that understanding what the activity that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, what is it actually for? I think being productive while you're waiting in kind of an uncomfortable space, it lets some things surface, but ultimately we kind of start to get down a path where avoidance is moving that discomfort to a different place that we don't want to feel. And I think that's the very difficult part. That's been the biggest struggle for me is trying to listen to what the space is telling me in the work that I need to do. And thankfully I was able to be in it long enough to write the book. There are still things I do today that I'm avoiding in order to be more comfortable than uncomfortable.
Steph, in your book, you discuss how career driven identities can affect our relationships. What are some of those hidden personal costs of defining ourselves primarily through our work that you've seen, and any coaching in terms of how to deal with those costs?
Yeah, I'm going to just address this from the context of kind of the situation that I'm in now. And the deepest cost that I've noticed, or the biggest cost that I've noticed, is presence. I talked about the scaffolding early on in our conversation. And I think when that scaffolding was removed, or when it was in existence, relationships, the people who mattered the most, they got whatever attention was left over after the job was done. So part of what I'm doing now is trying to be more present, trying to rebuild relationships, trying to understand where I may have missed in the past. There are 2 points in the book where, one, my wife asked me, was it all worth it? And it was hard for me to answer that because financially, all of the things that I put in and the career, it was worth it financially. But personally, I answered very quickly, no, I wasn't there for friends. I wasn't there for family. I wasn't there for my wife in many occasions. The second part of the regret piece of it, or the presence piece of it, is that when my father passed away in 2008, I completely avoided any emotional part of that. And one of our last conversations was about passwords, bank passwords, 401k passwords, whatever it was. And I was just relying on the comfort of the practical and avoiding any type of emotion. So I think part of the coaching piece of it is that, again, back to the who are you when you're not doing the thing that you're doing, becomes a little bit more meaningful, because are you present, and can you be present for the people around you outside of work, or even while you're doing the thing that you're doing? And I know it sounds like a very abstract question, but that who you are piece is really a driver for a lot of resolution when your identity is taking over who you are.
Geoff, when it's all said and done, how would you define a meaningful life if it isn't based primarily on titles or achievement or career success?
So I don't know. I'm getting to the other side, so I don't know if I have a fully formed answer yet, but I can tell you that I'm learning a few things. Meaningful life is, for me, is built on presence and relationships rather than metrics. Being there for people who matter, trading, I guess, the visible external achievement for the more meaningful kind, the more productive kind, I think is one thing, but really the presence and relationships. Meaningful life is also one where I can navigate transitions, any of transition that may come up in the future, with vulnerability, patience, and where I can get to a point where I'm holding my identity a little bit more loosely and trying new versions of myself versus trying to defend the past. I'm starting to learn again that kind of productivity is not the same as progress. And I have to be careful about what I'm thinking is actual progress versus productivity as I'm starting to do things with the book, as I'm starting to build the nonprofit. But I'm really trying to focus on how I'm present for others and just how I'm aware of navigating those transition. And again, trying to get out of the habit of being beholden to similar metrics that I had when I was in my career.
Geoff, we went through so much great information here. If our listeners remember just one thing about making this transition and the whole purgatory of self understood better and dealt with, what would that one thing be that you would tell them to keep in mind?
Well, and this is going to be a hard one, but I wish more people would stop performing being fine and being okay with being unfinished. Don't let the busyness become the only thing that drives you and the only thing that you're using to avoid kind of the real work that needs to be done. I think, again, we're very performative of being fine when we really need to look inside ourselves and frankly say these things aloud, that we're not fine or that we're unfinished.
Geoff, thank you so much for your time, for your experiences, for your vulnerability. I think that for our listeners, this is a time to lean in, to get clear about yourself and what you want, and to create that action plan to find personal satisfaction and happiness. I really do appreciate all that you've shared this morning. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bob, for having me. Appreciate it.